Kia ora, welcome everybody. Ko Wadia Toko Ingoa. I'm here with Sandra Yellowhorse today, and I'll get us going for our kōrero with a karakia. So, karakia te matanga. Manakitia teine hui, manakitia teine roku, manakitia teine whanau, tainoa ki teine kaupapa. Arahina na kōrero, arahina na patai, arahina na ture nei kia puta ai te maramatanga. Amine, welcome everybody. So we have Sandra here with us today, and I'm going to quickly introduce Sandra. I'm going to read out some stuff, but most importantly, Sandra is a parent, fellow parent, of a neurodivergent youth. And it has been absolutely fabulous connecting with you, Sandra. We haven't known each other for long, but it feels really familiar and the connection feels genuine and authentic. So I'm really, really privileged to know you and thank you for coming along here. So Dr. Sandra Yellowhorse. Now let me pronounce this correctly. So Kenyani, Towering House people, born for the French of the Diné nation from Gallup, New Mexico. And Sandra is a mother whose daughter is an autistic artist, gamer, and singer, and has deeply shaped her life's work. So, drawing on her lived experience, Sandra writes and speaks about autism from an indigenous perspective, providing training for professionals and educators to better support indigenous autistic people and their whānau. So Sandra holds a PhD in education from Waipapa Taumata Rao, the University of Auckland, and is a researcher and disability justice scholar at Te Puna Wananga, dedicated to equity, representation, and Indigenous knowledge in education and disability spaces. So welcome, Sandra. This kōrero is really, really important for me at two levels. One is you bring that lived experience as a parent, and two, you bring the Indigenous perspective. And when NATINA was being founded, and we were talking about what's going to be really important, making sure that we brought forward the lived experiences of disabled neurodivergent people, their families, parents was really important. That was one sort of key pole. But the other one was, upholding te tiriti and the sort of, Indigenous perspectives that we often miss out on when we start looking at neuroscience and, research and trauma-informed approaches and the Western sort of approaches. So that's really important. And I'm really, really looking forward to having this conversation with you today. So look, without further ado, introduce yourself in your words. Is there anything you'd like to share with us about you, your, journey, family, sort of, priorities, what matters to you, what drives you, and your family. So yeah, welcome. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Fran. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Sandra Yellowhorse Kapeli toko ingoa, ko Navajo Nation aho. I'm really grateful to be here in this space and thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. It's always lovely to spend time with you, Fran. So thank you. She'e Sandra Yellowhorse Unishia ki ani nishland do biligana bashesh chin tachini dashache do kinlachini dashanele ko tie goama nishle. Um, this is my identity as a Danette person, as a Kiani person, a Towering House person, and also more specifically as a mother. I do a lot of my own thinking around my identity from this really cherished space of being Danette, having a unique connection to a specific place and community and peoplehood, and then also the unique role and value of our mothers, our grandmothers within our community as a matriarchal society. So I'm always so grateful to have this space and to think from this space. So thank you so much. You may not know where the Diné Nation is. It's very far away. So it's the largest tribe in the United States. It's from the little southwest corner of the United States in the southwest, and it encompasses New Mexico, Arizona, and a couple parts of Utah at the very bottom. And so I'm quite a long ways from home. Uh, I um, came into this work, into this space because of my beautiful Kia'ani child, my beautiful daughter, who, as Fran mentioned, is a gamer, singer, artist, dancer. She's a TikTok extraordinaire. She's a crazy cat lady. Like she's all these wonderful, amazing things. And she's also a person who is autistic. And so, so much of my own work in this space has come from my life experience of journeying alongside her, learning from her, being led by her, taught by her. And I bring so much of that own learning into this space when I think about myself as a professional, as an academic, and really kind of upholding, what are the most important things that we can think about when our children are teaching us about this unique way of being in the world and this own way of navigating and expressing their own reality. And I've been quite privileged in that sense. So that's a big driver of the work that I do is really thinking of that space of how do we think about the complexity of identity, of peoplehood, of our own self-determination, our own meaning making of what it means to be in the world, and what makes for a good life for people, what makes for an abundant, balanced life full of beauty and goodness. And so definitely my child shows that to me in many, many ways. And I try to lead with that within the spaces that I work in. The other side of that is also talking to systems and talking to wider social, educational, political systems, right? And thinking really kind of about what it is that I wanted to achieve with the work in academia and how I even ended up in that space. So, like many parents, when we go back and we start thinking about kind of what were kind of the moments that were the most challenging and kind of the turning point, if you will. And I always think it started at a table. It started at an IEP table, right? As a mom, as someone who comes from this very humble background, who didn't have any type of higher education. I had graduated from high school, from secondary school. I was working class. I was working as a pizza delivery driver. I was a young mom. And here's my beautiful child who I love and adore and cherish and think about within this very unique, special genealogy. She's descended from these great people, this ancestry. She's connected to all these really wonderful things. And here I am at a table with professionals who know best, trying to tell me all these things that were very negative about my child, how she's struggling in the school system. They were struggling for all these things. And so I always say that the views I have now, they're not so much different than the views I had at that time, rewinding back to those very early days. Uh, I just have more skills now to be able to speak about those views and those values. But I was treated as no one, right? I was treated as someone who I'm the one that should be listening to them. They're the ones who know better. They're the ones who are trying to tell me. And I'm sitting there trying to express myself. And there were so many times I ended up in my car crying after these meetings, thinking, why can't I speak to them? Why can't I tell them? Why can't I tell them, my aspirations and the things I've seen her do and how she learns and how she feels safe and how she expresses herself and that rebellion is a wonderful thing and that it's a good thing and that there's a way to channel it and like there's all these great things, just trying to reframe this very deficit narrative. And so it was kind of from that journey and just having the right people in my life that I was directed to go in to get some study. And so I went in and did some legal assisting courses so that I could read policy, so that I could understand how to survive in these systems. So
Yeah.
it really I just kind of ended up in this space. I never had an aspiration to get a PhD, to be a doctor, to do all of this stuff. This all came from just journeying alongside and the love and the determination not to just be kind of run over in this system, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that was a big part of it. And um I think for us, just thinking back, I really think that the value of parent voice is so like people don't understand. It's like underrated within
yeah,
systems, right?
yeah.
People use parent voice as like a checkbox, like okay, we included parent voice, but
Mhm.
actually parent voice is so central to so many things because it offers us these layered ways that we understand people themselves and kind of the wider context of community because a lot of the issues with disability work sometimes tends to look at people as individuals, individual problems instead of wider
Yeah,
systemic
yeah.
failures that don't provide care
Mhm.
or systems of care to adequately meet the needs of how diverse we all are. And so I really think it's so important to listen to families and to listen to parent voice. And that's how I
Mhm.
kind of ended up in the work I do today. I'm a
Mhm.
research fellow at the University of Auckland. I do two projects that are related to autism specifically. One is a book project that's bringing together kind of different indigenous communities' perspectives of autism to
Yeah,
really provide that resource for people to think about like more creative, abundant ways of thinking about people and what autism means to them and their families, and to really have a resource for our autistic indigenous children to look at and read and know that they're loved. There's a community that's thinking about them in these ways, right? It's so much different than doing a Google search, what is autism? And it's like,
yeah.
who knows all these things. Like there has to be some sort of narrative there to carry people. So that's a big passion project of mine, and that I work with other Indigenous scholars in that space. And then I also work in the inclusive education space because, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about education, about creating equity, creating safety, belonging, a chance to really grow into this life journey of ours, not to
Yeah,
just
yeah.
struggle through systems and check all the boxes and meet all the markers, but really to have joy and abundance and a sense of community in life, which I think those are the things that are the most
Mhm.
fulfilling, right? So that's the basis of Indigenous inclusive education, is to really think about that wider context. So that's kind of where my work is now. And yeah, just very informed by my own lived experience and my own journey alongside my child.
That is so amazing, Sandra. I mean, you are a powerhouse. Getting all of that done and put together, and what a journey from doing pizza delivery to PhD and research. And it's amazing. I always think, our kids drive us and our kids guide us to learn and grow. And they stretch us sometimes, even when things are really uncomfortable. I think for me, what really stood out to me when you were talking was your focus on finding the goodness, the abundance, the joy, the community. And I can honestly say to you that for many years in the beginning, my focus wasn't on that. My focus was on rights. My focus was on fighting. I literally used to think, battle ready, fighting. We're going to make sure there's a space for my child to belong. And, until I hit rock bottom and until I sort of realized, what am I fighting for even? Like, I'm fighting and fighting and fighting, and there's no joy, there's no genuine, authentic connection or community for my kids. And I'm just wearing myself down, and I'm actually showing up, drained out, exhausted, and in battle mode. I sort of, prepared for anything in battle mode, and I'm showing up in that same way for my own kids. And so I remember I had to make a really conscious conscious choice to actually start focusing on the joy and a bit abundance, and keep trying to stay focused on that and not so focused on the battle mode. And yeah, it isn't easy when your nervous system gets used to it, isn't it? And I think about it in a lot of ways. Like I'm thinking about the cultural differences. So you obviously grew up, you were in a space in the cultural sort of perspectives where autism and difference were accepted and valued. And the holistic sort of perspective was always looked at. Whereas I remember growing up in a space in a society where disability was never valued. Disability was looked down upon. Disability was, or any difference, in all honesty, was looked down upon and was, something you hid away from the rest of society. And so, although, over here, I've always sort of fought for my kids for inclusion, and I genuinely believe in inclusion. Um, I didn't realize um, that I didn't always have to fight for it. There were other
Mm.
ways of trying to make it happen. And I really think for me that the whole journey of becoming neuroscience and trauma informed and starting to focus on wellness and building connections through safety rather than, opposition and sort of the being in that fight space was really important as a parent. So I love what you've sort of talked about, that focus on the abundance and joy and goodness in life, and how do we, and I didn't sort of start thinking about all of that until years later, starting to focus on that enabling good lives approach and looking at, how do we create community connections, well-being for our, kids and our families. So thank you for that reminder and that sort of, focus in that space. I have one question for you in terms of, the value of parent voice. You mentioned it's really underrated and it's often that tokenistic tick box sort of, approach. Where and how do you think that, parent voice can come through? Where do you think? Because I know you've talked about at that personal level, sitting in the IEP, not being heard. And I've heard so many parents sort of, say that. And me too, I've had, the positive experiences and negative experiences. And the sad thing is because there's no systemic consistency or commitment towards inclusive education, our experiences just vary depending on the individual people we interact with, right? And the individual teachers, individual educators, individual professionals we meet. So I'm just wondering, what do you think would really help? Where do you think parent voice should be embedded, to make sure that it is effective enough to create the kind of spaces we need for our kids, right? And whether it's inclusive education, inclusive policies, practices, and health, social services, whatever it is, where and how do you think that parent voice could be, coming through and created space for uh,
Mm.
in the systemic sort of spaces?
Yes, well, thank you. You brought something up that's really important that I just like to hold on to for a second, and that is just the ways in which parents um, are pulled into that fight mode with systems, right? They are, and there is so much that gets lost when you're living in that space because it becomes trying to negotiate with systems or services or programs or
Mhm.
schools that aren't really interested in actually changing, right? Because it's such a hard engagement and it wears people down. And when that happens, that dampens the opportunity to bring in kind of the wider knowledge that parents have. So for me, I
Yeah.
think what I find most useful is working on kind of the social knowledge of disability more generally. It
Mm,
surprises me how so many people don't know about disability issues.
yeah,
I know this from teaching in the school. I always ask my students, how many of you plan to work with disabled people? And maybe
yeah,
one or two out of a whole classroom, and it's like 25% of the population is disabled.
yeah,
And like there's a large, you will meet
yeah,
disabled people wherever you go, but people don't know how to talk about it. They don't have the language. They're scared. Educators are
yeah,
scared to talk about disability. There's no, everything we're taught about disability is that it's shameful and that it's related to burden and struggle and
mm,
survival. And that's the messaging we get when we get diagnoses as well.
yeah,
Like there's this whole sort of unspoken spokenness about
mm,
just the hardship surrounding it. And I think for me as an educator, as someone who has worked with a variety of different people, I know that young children are so curious and that they want to know, they want to understand, and they have that openness, that heart knowledge that leads them. And when they have an educator who models how to be a good relation and how to create a community around people, just the community, right,
yeah,
itself. That is what is important. The focus then becomes on the system that supports people
yeah,
who are diverse, right?
yeah,
And that's the really small shift
yeah,
there that I think is so important. And so family voice, it belongs everywhere. It belongs
mm,
leading in the social space, some sort of
mm,
reimagining and defining of diversity, of peoplehood, of what
mm,
that means, and just holding that space. Because I
yeah,
think, parent voice, it's very difficult because sometimes with parent voice, some things that I notice too is that we, and I will say we, myself included, have
yeah,
been pulled in to talk about systems where the focus becomes on the harm in the system. It's so traumatic, and I want to hold that because it is, the parent voice can be trying to get that validation and visibility that, yes, this is hurtful, this is harmful, hear me, love my child, respect my child, see us, like help us, like, and that becomes, that's so important, so important. And again, the outside layer of that is that wider family knowledge, the knowledge of the
mm,
child themselves, the things that the parent aspires to and sees within the child, right? Those are part of the family voice and knowledge that have so much potential to change what we know about diversity in people, but we don't get the opportunity to get to that space because we're too busy fighting for visibility. We're too busy asking to be recognized and to be
mm,
seen and to have our rights respected. And so you have this kind of social system that
yeah,
looks at parents like, oh, like I write about this in my work, like I was that mom. I'm so difficult, I'm so bossy, I have so many demands. There's other, everything. And and it
uh,
really is in those situations about
yeah,
the relationships and trying to
yeah,
work with those key people, right? The key people that do hold that space, that see you and recognize what you're doing, and then they open that for you to share. And
yeah,
that's where the magic happens, and that's where the growth happens,
mm,
and the support and the community building happens. And so I feel, in terms of parent voice, I think it really is about widening our understanding about, just different diverse perspectives in general,
mm,
unsettling the medical model of disability,
yeah,
unsettling kind of even just like the social, all the different models we have. There has to be
yeah,
other models too, indigenous
yeah.
models, other ways of thinking about people. And so, yeah, I think it's really important that point you brought up.
Oh, look, there's so much you've shared, and I've been nodding my head. And, that whole bit about becoming that parent. And I remember when I first started my journey, and I would connect with parents, and parents would say, unless you become that parent, you don't get heard. I don't care anymore if I'm that parent. I don't care anymore if, um, I'm known as that parent, but I need to do this because my child needs it. And I remember, um, it was the same for me. And for me, the other thing was when I first started, I was all about I'm going to get all the resourcing, all the funding I can, and how do we make it happen? And very soon I realized, even with all the funding, I can't make inclusion happen because I can't make people accept my child or create space for my child or include them in, what's happening. And I realized very soon that it was the people that mattered. And this is why I love the whakatauki that talks about, what is the most important thing in the world. And it is he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. And so I found that you've got to invest time into people. You've got to invest building that relationship with people. And that's when the real, I guess, shift starts to happen. And so, as much as I am all about systemic change and transformation and advocacy, I still feel even that systemic shift change doesn't happen unless you're able to connect with the people in those
Mm,
influential spaces. And often, if we are carrying that nervous system that is in fight flight, then we are repelling people away from us, and um, we are inadvertently encouraging people to build walls up to keep themselves safe from us. And so I think that's where that disconnection happens, and we can't be effective enough. I still remember years ago, this was, I think it was because one of my children weren't allowed at camp or something, and we were having these heated conversations with school staff and the ministry staff were also present. And at the end of the whole meeting, one of the ministry staff members really sweetly took me aside and said, "Oh, look, I love your passion for your children and da da da, but just wondering if just sort of position yourself um, a bit more." In a collaborative manner, and I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm trying to work with the school, and they're not working with me." I can look back now and I can actually, now that I understand, how the nervous system works, how, we show up, how we, all that interpersonal, neurobiology works, I can understand how I would have been really sort of, threatening to somebody else and they would straight away sort of back off. And so I think it is so important, isn't it, for us as parents to realize where we're at and the other thing, I think sometimes society doesn't allow you to do that because culturally and the societal norms expect you to put your child always ahead of you and sacrifice everything as a woman, as a parent, as a mother. And, your needs completely get sort of sidelined and you're expected to sort of always be there, show up for your child, and do everything perfectly. And I think that's the other thing. I put a lot of pressure on myself as well, because it's kind of a vicious cycle. I think, you as a parent, you want to do the best for your child. So you do all that, as a mom, and then society's applauding you and going, yay, what a fabulous mother, super mom and all of that. And I reached a stage in my life where if somebody said super mom, I was like, "Oh, please don't. Like, I don't want to be a super mom. I'm kind of, forcing myself to be a super mom, but I don't want this. I want to be a chilled out mom. I want to be a mom who doesn't, get so uptight and tensed and is on hyper alert all the time. I don't want to be that mom. Because it's draining. And so I think that's the other thing, isn't it? We are forced into some of these ways of being, and we don't realize we kind of get stuck into it then, and that's our default, and then it's so hard to shift sort of later on down the track. Tell me a little about culturally speaking, and so this is my experience, in the culture not only that I grew up in, but also now I'm living in New Zealand. So I grew up in India. um, I've been here now 25 years, and my kids were born here, and sort of we raised them here, but it was the same kind of message that, you know, was implied as a parent, as a mother. You do everything, you show up. And it's funny, but even when even when a dad is around, it's the mother who gets called. It's the mother who gets, sort of pointed the finger at. And so where and how do indigenous perspectives stand in terms of some of those issues around gender roles and parenting a neurodivergent or disabled sort of child? Tell me a bit about that.
I
What's
have
it been
lots of
like for you?
lots of thoughts. Well, I just to touch on something you said, that the expectations of mothers in general are very, very difficult, right? Like you have to be this exceptional mom who's composed and remembers everything and all of these things all the time. And sometimes when we're in these really stressful environments where there's breakdowns all around us, right? And there's this we're often the first ones kind of experiencing and trying to shield that systemic inequality around us for our children.
Yeah.
It really takes a toll and it can wear you down. I've written about this so much about how I feel sometimes that these are systemic strategies to get us to comply in the end, to give up, to surrender, to
Mm,
say, okay, just wear them down long enough and they'll just move on. Because, and like that's a really, really shocking thing when you start
yeah.
to think about it and thinking about the the mums perhaps in my case as a mom having to really be in that space where you're completely worn down and tired wanting to have that compassionate approach and collaborative approach. And I hear you absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, to just trying to figure out how to emotionally regulate ourselves as mothers is so difficult, especially when we might have our own challenges with emotional regulation. Like as one person had mentioned, we might be disabled parents ourselves or have
Yeah.
neurodivergence ourselves, right? So there's all these things that are piled on, and yet we're expected to fit this sort of normative kind of, I would say, kind of a global understanding of motherhood sometimes. Certainly within our communities, they're quite different. As I mentioned, the Enough people are a matriarchal society. That doesn't mean that we are not touched or impacted by patriarchy in any
Yeah.
sense. We definitely have that as well. And we definitely have diversity amongst us in how we think. When I think about kind of indigenous worldview, specifically Diné people, there is no one Diné worldview. There's a lot of us. We're all different. I'm a mixed French Diné person myself, and have my own types of different ways of being that are
Yeah.
diverse from other people that give me a different perspective from other Diné people that may um, live in a different area or have a different type of
Yeah.
upbringing, right? And so I think it's really difficult when we come up against these kind of social norms that we have. And I think for us parenting from my own community, when I think about parenting, I think about the grandmas in my life. I love my grandmas so much. I always say granny power, like our
Yeah.
grannies
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
that unconditional love. And it's because I experienced that from my grandparents that I knew no matter what, like that they would love me. And just like bringing tears to my eyes now, thinking about that, like that's the kind of person I try to be for my child. Like to just, it's such a high bar, but it really is rooted in this deep, radical love and acceptance, unconditional love. Um, and so I think for me, I had that privilege of having that and that blessing. So, but also, you know, the challenges within what can be sometimes very racist places, right? It's like I write about this as well. Like the indigenous women have some of the highest rates of uplift of having their children put into care systems, of experiencing all the worst, statistics and things like that. So the kind of view that people have, right, wider society may have towards indigenous women in the United States specifically can be very negative. So you're up against that as well, right? That's why this intersectionality of thinking about our diverse lives and all the ways
Yeah.
that we're impacted by oppression and inequality. It's not just
Yeah.
within the patriarchal realm. It's in these other layered areas, right? These
True.
expectations of how we have to be, right?
Mhm.
And so I think for me, I certainly received a lot of negative feedback, and like always worried about being that mom, but also being the mom who didn't do enough.
Mhm.
Would people think I wasn't fighting hard enough? Were they thinking that, when I started going into my education and developing myself and taking time for myself, would they think that I wasn't a good parent? Investing in
Yeah.
myself. Like when I wanted to move to New Zealand for PhD
Ah,
study, it was like that was something for me to really drive what I wanted to do. And my
mhm.
daughter was very generous and loving and kind and supportive and came, and it was such a big transition, right? And that can be huge for our young people. But also the concern that society has about those things because we are expected to be self-sacrificial all the time. But as I
Yeah.
learned, as they tell us in the airplane, you have to put on your mask first
Yeah.
before you can help others. And over the years, I've kind of learned that, like really thinking about how do I care for myself. Um, and I've noticed this kind of came about too within the professional training space as well when I learned about this practice called nonviolent communication. And I was taking this course because I was thinking I need some help to think about how do I work with the fun teenage years, right? We've got all
Yeah.
this like very wonderful opinions and
Yes.
all kinds of things happening. I need some tools. And I
Yeah.
thought, like most behavior oriented kind of communication programs, they're going to focus on the individual and like curating the environment for them in some place. I was shocked when it was turned around and it was focused on me. And I was thinking, oh, well, how do I do these things? Like, what do I do? And it really absolutely kind of changed my perspective about thinking, we really have to take that time to get to understand ourselves and know ourselves. And I think busy moms who are taking care of everything, we don't have a lot of those luxuries. I mean, we're too busy
Yeah.
memorizing like all the brand names that our kids love to get, which store has them stocked, all of these things. Like we're experts in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But how do we make that time for ourselves to really think about how do we work through what can be perhaps our own trauma, our own invalidation, our own worries about what people think about us.
Yeah.
Um, and, this was something that I thought about when I was driving earlier, Fran. I was thinking about just the type of ways that parents themselves can unintentionally perpetuate internal ableism towards their children because we receive so much of that negative
Yeah.
feedback from systems. Our teachers are coming to us with their grievances. Can you talk to your child? Can you? And I
Yeah.
I got a lot of that, a lot of can you talk to? And I noticed that a lot of my communication was actually instruction instead of connection, right? This
Yeah.
whole,
Yeah.
this is, trying to, and I'm thinking this
Yeah.
is me being a good parent, trying to direct in the right way because I'm having all
Yeah.
these fears about what will happen if I don't do that. But yet, the type of narrative our children hear from us, I'm not good enough, I'm always being corrected, this and that, that's so harmful. And so I'm really recently been really curious about this space of thinking about how do we draw those boundaries with professionals who don't respect our individual relationship with our children
Yeah.
as someone who's going to be on their side and not be the person that's going to funnel all of this negative feedback to them over and over. Because I read this study that children with ADHD get like 20,000 times
Yeah.
more or 20,000 more negative messages by
Yeah.
the time they're 10. And that shocked me. And I just think, if we're building if we're really building this system of care, of support, of unconditional love, then at some point as parents, we have to sort of kind of reject, in many ways, some of those
Yeah.
well-intentioned, maybe, perspectives of people trying to get us to talk to our kids. in their best interest, always framed in that way, but actually
Yeah.
no, in the long run, no.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of self-awareness for me that's really helpful as a Danette parent, as a mother, to really think like, what am I doing that is bringing wholeness to this situation? And it really comes from that critical, reflective space, which is, I think we all need. I think educators need that as well. You know, when I finally started telling people, don't ask me to talk to her, I'm working on my good relations with her at this point. They were kind of shocked, like, "Oh," you know, and I was thinking,
Yeah,
well, you know,
yeah.
they judge me, they could get in line. At this
I
point, like we've done a lot.
look, I so agree with you on this. Because so I didn't realize it with my older two because they went through their teenage years with very little verbal communication back and forth, right? So my oldest is non-speaking completely, but he communicates in other ways. And he has been trying to assert himself in so many different ways. And for me, what I realized was I wasn't getting the message. I was failing to hear what he was trying to communicate. And then we would have these behavior escalations, and then I'd get really frustrated and I'd try to get help and I'd be like, someone help me, fix this behavior. And then I'd realize, oh my gosh, it's happening because this is what he's trying to say. I'm not responding to it, you know. And so giving him, um, valuing what he was trying to communicate by giving him that choice and control as he's sort of grown older has been really critical for me. And I have had to learn it the hard way at times because I've, like you say, I'm carrying on with this is what is expected, this is what should happen, this is how things should go. Whereas he's obviously going, actually, this is not what I want to do. This is how I want to, roll. And so I think it takes time for us as parents as well, isn't it, to adjust as they shift into those different stages of life and as they are starting to own more of their own identity and assert themselves. Um, and the other thing I loved what you said was, what are we doing? Are we having a relationship that is based on connections, or are we just having a relationship that is telling them what to do and instructing and directing them? And I have to keep reminding myself every few days about it to pull back because I keep putting a lot of expectations and pressure on my youngest one who is able to speak. And, he's neurodivergent, but he's different from his brothers. So in my head, obviously, with the family dynamics and the children's different needs, I think, oh, well, I've got to make sure he succeeds in life. He's got a job. He's independent, and so all of that pressure that I feel as a parent, societal expectations in general, I keep putting it onto him every few sort of weeks. I'll realize what I'm doing and I'm like, okay, pull back, stop it, pull back, stop it. But then I'll go back into it and I'll realize, oh my gosh, I'm doing it again now. But what I love is that my son is now at this stage where he is able to articulate and stand his ground and tell me exactly how he's feeling. And that is such a huge thing I'm proud of about him because when he was little, he wouldn't even share what he thought. And he would whisper if he had to say something, but he would never express what he needed or he wanted genuinely, authentically. He kind of went along with whatever was expected for a long time. So I think it's so important, isn't it, really being able to listen to our kids, creating spaces where they feel safe enough to share. Because I've even had comments like, well, I'm not going to tell you because you don't listen to me anyways. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, okay, I will try to do better, but you just, you assume that as a parent, you have authority, you have power. And that's how I grew up. I grew up with you do something because your parents said so. You do something because your, elders have said that, and you respect your elders and you don't question. And although I was the rebellious kid and I was always questioning, despite that, despite knowing, when you grow up and you're so entrenched in a certain way of being, I didn't realize how much of it I had taken on. And I joke with my mom and, about this sometimes because I used to tell my mom when I was younger, I used to say, I'll never be like you. I'm never going to be like you. I'm going to be the coolest mom. And then I say things and do things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing what my mom did, or I'm saying what my mom did. And, I don't appreciate it. My child doesn't appreciate me saying that or doing that. So there's so much that we absorb, I think, from our culture, environment. And it's the same thing our kids start absorbing. So we've got to start being so mindful, isn't it, as parents, how we show up. Yeah, so it's really, really important. Um,
Yes.
that
Such,
self-reflection, being
yes.
really, honest with yourself, being critical, is really important. And the last thing I want to share quickly is, what I've realized is the more I've gone into the space of becoming trauma informed for my child, for making spaces better, I think it's actually sort of made me aware of some of those hidden traumas. And I say hidden traumas because I always think I didn't have any overt, obvious traumas. I didn't have any traumatic experiences as such. So I shouldn't be traumatized or scarred, or I shouldn't be carrying trauma. But, it's really made me aware of how so many things that were said um, have impacted me in such a negative way and have impacted my views and beliefs about myself, have limited me in some ways, have, led to a lot of that self-doubt. Um, and I can't help it but think that the more I work around becoming neuroscience and trauma informed to support my kids, the more I'm starting to discover layers that have been hidden, from my past, my history. And I think unless you deal with that and unless you really take the time, I think, to unpack some of that, you can't sort of really process it and move past it. Yeah, so that's something I'm starting to realize as a parent. And so again, being really honest about it, taking the time to deal with it is so important, isn't it?
It is, and you're absolutely, I just absolutely agree with you. It is a journey, isn't it? Like, and it is one that we requires so much compassion for ourselves. Because I think when I started doing kind of trauma-informed work and reflection, I always used to think like I'm not traumatized, like like
Yeah,
that you don't
yeah,
recognize that.
yeah,
And in many ways, our relationships with our children bring out those areas that there is trauma, right? Where there is something perhaps through our own projection onto them, our expectations, our
yeah.
everything, it comes from some space that's asking for attention and healing within us, right? And so I really appreciate what you said there. And it is, I think, requires so much compassion as well for parents, really just give ourselves a lot of that love. I mean, we're doing our best. My husband always tells me, your best is always enough. And it really
Beautiful.
is helpful when it's such a struggle, right? Because
Yeah.
we don't have to know everything and be perfect. And as long as we're making that journey,
Mhm.
um, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful gift for ourselves and for our future generations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, look, Monica's got a question saying, can you perhaps talk about your unschooling journey?
Oh,
Um,
yes. You must have read our my little co-authored article with Noah. So Noah Romero's a wonderful Indigenous scholar who's done work on unschooling. And there's a parallel between unschooling and Indigenous education, which I kind of frame as this like education for life, interest, joy sake, right? So in my context, I suppose I was unschooled in a in a way. I was homeschooled. There was a curriculum, there were things there. I don't want to talk too much about it, but but I think for me, my parents really kind of they set me up to think about myself and made space for me to find joy, right? I came from a very rigid kind of they worked very hard to put me through private schooling in my early days, and I was bullied quite a lot when I was a young child, which was really traumatic for me. And so when I was brought into this little realm of being homeschooled, it was mostly to just bring me under the umbrella of my grandparents, which was really wonderful because again, this is why I have that big connection to my grandparents and just what a special space that was. But it really is thinking critically. It shaped how I thought about the process of assessment in general, right? Like I think in when we think about unschooling and kind of my own experience, it was never about this process of assessment or taking tests to succeed. It was really kind of about that journey of getting to know oneself and getting to think about what we think about. Really spending time having these big kind of philosophical questions about society, the world, and people. And I think it was because of that, because I had that time to creatively write, to journal, to do all these things, that it really set me up as an educator to think critically about our process of schooling. So when I apply that to things like inclusive education or kind of the merit-based processes in schooling in general, and just how it's so ableist and focused towards this checkbox journey of getting somewhere and making, having achievement in these very type of confined senses. Like that doesn't align with how I was kind of brought into this world of education, where it was really about the experience. It was about joy. It was about music. It was about connecting. It was about hearing people's life stories. It was about spending time with my grandparents. And so I think that really set me up. And when I did go back to public school, I was actually so much further ahead than my peers in terms of like the writing and things like that. And I think, that's kind of the pushback against kind of these systems as well. They don't promise that they will create equity, right? They don't. Like, even if you succeed within these systems, doesn't mean that you're going to have a chance at equity. I think, I think for when we think about indigenous education for our diverse learners, it really is about bringing in that social consciousness of community, of belonging, of understanding our life is so precious, actually. Our life is so unique and precious. And what is the way that we can be educated to be curious about the world, about one another, that will bring us like beauty in our lives? Like for me, that's education, right? How do we have these right relations of how the world works and how we just live our best so that we can flourish? And that's to me, that's a social consciousness that's missing in a lot of education systems. And when we have like a lot of this assessment, which is always difficult because, if you have children who have IEPs, we're sitting there with all these assessment things, and it becomes very checkboxy. And, at the end, are they happy? Are they enjoying their life? Do they have opportunity to explore who they are and have a sense of fulfillment? Like those, I think, are some of the treasures of Indigenous education that for me really kind of drive the development of thinking about, yeah, just how do we have education for life's sake? That's what one of my mentors, Tiwa scholar, his name's Gregory Kahete, talks about that, an education for life. And so this whole kind of resonance with unschooling sits within that space of kind of dreaming, that liberatory space of saying, yes, there can be structures and systems, and yes, we can have all those, but also it's okay to have these other spaces you where you grow into yourself and are nurtured within the right type of environment, right? That helps you become your best self. That may have been a bit of a tangent, but I really feel blessed that I had a bit of an unusual kind of kind of upbringing. And I really have to thank my mom. She was patient. Bless her. She was patient.
That's amazing, Sandra. I think, a lot of parents, so years ago when we started our journey, um, and I would hear about parents homeschooling or unschooling, I always felt like, but why are you not fighting it? Like, why are you not fighting to make the inclusive education happen? And very soon I realized why they weren't fighting, because fighting is exhausting. And sometimes it just comes to a point where spaces become unsafe and spaces become really harmful for our kids, isn't it? And you have to weigh up, you know, is it worth going through this whole fight and, fighting to find a space when you're sort of, tired, exhausted, and your child is actually, having a harmful experience, a traumatic experience, rather than a genuine sort of learning, enriching experience. So, I honestly do see a lot of value, like you say, for some kids, you may need to step out and you may need to, unschool and homeschool. But I always think, why can't we have more inclusive spaces? Why can't we have the systemic equity and systemic sort of, shift towards more inclusion? Um, and one of the things you said today has really struck me, and I've realized that will never ever happen unless we focus on inclusion across the spaces, right? Across sectors, across, all sorts of dimensions of our life. And I didn't realize, but for many years, I would say I'm focused on inclusive education. I was always like, inclusive education, that's my space. That's where I'm going to work. That's where I'm going to push hard. And as the years have gone by and I haven't seen any shifts happening really, I've realized actually we're never gonna make it if we don't start focusing on all the different aspects of life as well. And sometimes it is really about, focusing on some of the positive and running with it, and finding the individual people who sort of are really willing to support and make things happen. The best experiences, I guess, for me as a parent, along my children's journey, have been finding those individuals who have supported me, who have encouraged me, and professionals who have, I guess, taken the time to learn alongside my child and me. You know, um, I've learned a lot from my kids. You've learned a lot from, your child, and sort of you've gone with it. But when people are not willing to learn from our kids, it becomes really challenging. And it's worse when it's not just professionals, but it's also family members. It's also other people close to you, family, friends. I think that makes life so much harder for us as parents, isn't it? Because then you kind of lose some of that emotional support system and that network that you have been relying on, and they're off on a different tangent, and you're trying to sort of work with your child in a different sort of space. So how have you navigated some of that stuff where friends, family haven't quite come on board, or I don't know, maybe you've been lucky enough and you've got everybody on board backing you up. Yeah, how have you navigated some of that?
Yes, well, I think, just to touch back on what you said about inclusive education, you're absolutely right. Because I definitely inclusive education has to be further strengthened and developed and made accessible across a lot of areas. I just want to touch on that. I mean, I think people should have the choice to homeschool or unschool, that it shouldn't be something that's forced, which it happens like disproportionately to so
Yeah,
many of our families and learners. Um, so I think that's important. I guess in terms of, family attitudes and expectations, I mean, certainly my child was the first in our family to have a autism diagnosis. It was a first for a lot of us. And I think this is where it became tricky with some of those learned expectations of parenting, particularly around discipline, right? Not
yeah,
understanding access and support needs and how you build a community. So sometimes, within our communities, I've seen this more widely as well, that we actually build a family for ourselves, right? Out of friends, like along the journey, out of the community that journeys along next to us. We build this network of people because sometimes our family, maybe they don't know, maybe they have their own trauma, their own discipline, their own parenting, they have their own expectations of what you're supposed to be doing. They don't understand. And some people I've noticed, different parents sometimes like the language hasn't been developed. Like maybe they're non-English speakers, right? Like the language, what
Yeah,
is the actual language used to talk
yeah,
about these things? That there's not enough knowledge that bridges and makes
yeah,
accessible this information to people, to really understand and engage with it, right? And that's a big
yeah,
disparity in the US and here, I think, in Aotearoa as well.
yeah,
And so, how do you create access? I think for me, it is about finding that community of support, having people who understand your journey, right? Having people who
yeah,
understand and have that compassion and really love your family where it's at. They see the best in your kids because they see the best in their kids as well, right? Like that's that really important element of sometimes we have to reach into the other communities. That's why I'm such a big advocate
yeah,
of like disability support organizations, family groups, parent meetups, like those all are
yeah,
meaningful and so important and necessary and need more funding and resourcing around them. And that's where the creative magic happens. All the best advice I get comes from those
yeah,
areas from people who know, who've been there on the journey, right?
yeah,
And they're the ones that, when you feel exhausted and you're tired, those are the people you call because
yeah,
they can understand you, right? And so I think that so much of the hardship for people, I always say, it can be so isolating because we just want that acceptance for ourselves as parents, right? We want support. We want our kids to be
yeah,
supported, but then we want to be supported ourselves.
yeah,
Sometimes, sadly, that has to come from maybe outside your own family, and that can be really hard and difficult. But there is a beautiful community there, and I know that when you reach your hand out, someone will grab it. And that has been my experience in the United States. It's been that here as someone who's moved here that didn't know hardly anyone. Like
yeah.
you, you emailed me back. I was trying to figure out what I was doing here, like,
And
and
and I remember you even said, you said, I wasn't really expecting you to email me back because
yes,
I was a stranger. But you're absolutely right, and again, this is something I've learned along my journey as a parent. I have learned to let go of what's not working for you. I have
yes.
learned to let go of whatever it is, practices, habits, people, relationships, because sometimes we don't realize how much we drain ourselves by holding on or trying to make something work that isn't working. And yeah, I just wish I had started that earlier. I wouldn't have exhausted myself so much. But I've really learned now to consciously just let go of, things that aren't working for me, relationships that aren't working for me, and make sure I'm focusing my energy, my time, my effort on the ones that are working. Because it's
Yes.
hard. It's really hard, isn't it? When you have people or networks, spaces you've been in for a long time, and then suddenly, because your child is different, you're not really welcome, or you're not really understood, or you're not really you know valued. Even sometimes it's not even opposition or anything. Sometimes it's just that there's no value. You don't see yourself being valued. You don't see yourself being acknowledged. You know, I mean, I've had people close to me say things like, "Oh, why do you waste time on this advocacy stuff? And when you should be doing this, or why do you waste time on that?" And I think, but this gives me meaning. This gives me purpose. This is important for me, and this is important for my kids. And yeah, so I think even that not being seen, heard, and valued really sort of, gets in the way, and I've had to sort of go, that's fine if I'm not seen, heard, valued here, but there's these other people and spaces who do see me, who do value me. I can work with them and I can find shared, meaning and understanding and sort of, support each other through that journey in those spaces. So you're absolutely right. We've got to look outside sometimes, eh? And there's always someone there. And I've, yeah, just in life I've learned, ask, and you shall receive. Because if you don't ask, if you don't take pull up the courage to, go looking, go asking, go connecting, then you're never gonna find that community. And that's the most beautiful thing for me that's happened over my journey with my boys. I've connected with so many fabulous parents, so many people in the community, even professionals, even within their sort of restrictive, limited spaces with all the systemic barriers. There's some wonderful people doing such fabulous, work. And I've learned so much from them and grown so much for them. So I'm always grateful. And then again, in this NATINA space, just connecting with people who are keen and interested to learn more, grow more, and sort of develop our perspectives around neuroscience, trauma-informed approaches in different spaces, different contexts, has been such a valuable, enriching journey for me myself, and that's what fills my cup, I guess. So, I can show up as a better mother for my children. Yeah, and it's been absolutely
Beautiful.
fabulous having you here, Sandra,
You.
sharing about your sort of, journey and everything that you've been doing. So really, really value that. And thank you so much. Before I close, I have one last question. Now, your daughter is a gamer. How did you navigate the whole tension around the use of technology and just growing her strengths and interests in the space of gaming? How did that work? Because that's a very common question that parents will often sort of be debating. What was it like for you?
Well, I mean, I think one thing I was quite sensitive towards too in the beginning was this screen time limit, right? That you want to make sure that screen time is limited. Um, uh, good luck. Wow. I mean, these are passions, okay? These are deep passions for our young people. Um, I just think that if I was someone who was really, really loved something and it gave me sensory feedback, it gave me emotional
Yeah,
feedback, and it gave me stability and it gave me safety and it created a little world for me to that had some
yeah,
sort of sense of control and agency, right? And choice.
yeah,
That would be so valuable and treasuring, right? Like we would really care about that. That's kind of the perspective I've had is that, in the gaming world, um, those are really safe spaces for our
mhm,
kids often, and they're often spaces where they find respite. And I think that when you think about it that way, it really has to be held in a special way. This is kind of imposing our views of kind of what wider society views as valuable. Like, don't escape into
yeah,
these spaces. Like, be productive. Like, do these
yeah,
do these little math worksheets that you're not going to remember, you're not going to care about. I don't care about those. I'm thinking about this again comes back to the things we value that we place onto our children. Um, Sometimes, yes, have those things, of course, balance though, and respecting their choices, because that is their choice in many
yeah,
ways. And so I think for me, it has been about create like opening room for that space to be learning about these characters, trying to play video games together, have that shared enjoyment, learning about the characters, and as being that special person that they can info dump all the fandom on, right? And have that space with them, create that connection. And I think that's really meeting people where they're at and actually opening that space of collaborative learning together. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And I think I try to encourage parents to um, really nurture that space as a space
yeah.
that can be a joint endeavor together, right? But their kids, they
Amazing.
know they know when we care about what they care about, you know? And
Yeah,
that means a lot to them. Yeah. So I think again, coming from that place of like really deep love and compassion and understanding
yeah,
really helps. It really helps.
yeah. And this is so important what you've mentioned, we've got to learn to value what they value. Um, it's not about what we value or whether it gives us meaning or purpose. It's about what matters to them. It's about what gives them purpose, gives them meaning, gives them, the things that they need. And so it's really important, isn't it? We start shifting from just our perspective to their perspective, and then we can find some of that shared, spaces to connect in. So really, really beautiful how you've put it, Sandra. Thank you so much for sharing. Really, really appreciate having you over here. Um, and I'm sure we will see each other around and
We
continue to
will.
see each other. And perhaps when you've completed the project, the book that you're working on with the different indigenous perspectives, we can maybe have you back and you can share a bit more about, your findings and what you've gathered and put together. I
Oh,
think
I'd love that. I'd love that. Thank you. And it's been so good to spend time with you. Thank you for this space. And thank you to everyone for joining us. It's nice to read your comments and be together. Great to see you, Tiana.
Thank you. Look, I'll close us with a karakia. Once again, really, really appreciate your time and sharing your insights and perspectives. All right, so karakia whakamutunga, kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai, haumie hui e taikie.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ara, Paumarie.
Bye, everyone.